Father in heaven, we thank you that we can have Arlene come to visit us and share her knowledge and her wisdom and her information that she has learnt. Thank you that she's able to come here. And Lord, be with each of the people in this tent today, and those who can't come, we pray that you'll be with them too. Lord, we pray that you will speak through Arlene your message and your words, and open our eyes and our minds and our hearts to accept what you have for us. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Good morning. You know, every brain has their challenges. Mine is this ridiculous, bizarre, off-the-wall sense of humor. And you are very fortunate that most of the time I filter and monitor that. But when she was talking about the high tea, I'll give you an example of what I'm continually dealing with. First of all, did you get the information? High tea is on what day? Thursday. What time? 3 o'clock. Where? Good job. So she says, come and bring your husband. And my brain goes, well, if yours is busy, grab someone else's whose wife can't go. But it's probably not a good idea to say that. Okay, so we're going to talk today about one of my very, very favorite topics. I absolutely love male-female differences. There's huge amounts of research about that. And the more you know about it, the smoother your ride through life can be. Because I don't care whether you're partnered or not. You got to deal with the opposite gender all the time. And half of our problems are of our own making because we didn't understand the other gender. So this can help reduce that. All right, we're starting with brain benders, as always. So let's begin. Top left. Think outside the box is half of it. There you go. Think twice. If you're thinking inside the box and outside the box, it's double think or thinking twice. Good job. Second on the left, word in a word. Session is one of the words. What's the other one? Court is in session. You're getting good at these. Third on the left. The word is love, and what shape does it make? And what is L? Love letter, there you go. L is a letter. So love letter. I don't know if you have they brought the stage production of love letters to Australia? It's very, very good. If you get a chance to see it, I loved it. Of course, that might reflect my sense of humor. Bottom left. I'll be seeing you. Top right. Top right. Lace underwear. Good job. However, it usually is a male who gets that, not a female. But, you know, maybe they were a little reticent to. Second on the right. All right, that's one way of interpreting that. You are crazy. How else could you interpret that? Everything's crazy around you. And it's so interesting to see how different brains perceive the very same puzzle. Third on the right. Lost where? Lost at sea. Good job. And fourth on the right. Ahead of the game. Excellent. You're doing these much more quickly. That only took 2 minutes. I mean, the first day we spent 17 on one set of these. Not quite. But as your brain lays down the software, every time you do this, you get another coat of paving, myelin, and it's going quicker and quicker and quicker. And that's how fast your brain can actually learn. What do you see? What kind of bird? Who saw dove first? Okay, who saw swan first? All right. Let me turn it over. Does it make a difference what you see first? It will for some people, because what you see depends on which of your two eyes is your lead eye. So your lead eye is the one that does the focusing. Your other eye adds depth perception and background. So your lead eye tends to always look at the opposite side of what it's looking at first. So on the number 1 picture, if you have a right lead eye, you probably saw the swan. If you had a left lead eye, you probably saw the pigeon first. There are a few brains that see them both exactly at the same time. And those usually are brains that have their energy advantage up here in the right frontal lobe behind your right eye, where there's really no language, just gestures and pictures. And so sometimes they'll see it at the same time. On the second figure, if you have a right lead eye, you probably saw the pigeon first. If you have a left lead eye, this time you might have seen the swan first. So this is brain trivia. It doesn't really matter, except you may miss a lot in life just based on which of your eyes is your lead eye. Because if you're looking at something quickly, you'll look at the left side or the right side, but perhaps not the whole picture. And then we argue about what we saw. That's really very functional. What do you like better? Do you like the figures with the outline, or do you like them better filled in? Who likes the filled in? All right. Who likes the outline best? The rest of you haven't seen it yet? So it doesn't matter, just know what you like better, because if you have a choice, you can choose one or the other. All right, this morning we're talking about specific differences. Well, we're going to be talking about that all week, really, but we're really going to be talking about some key differences. We are members of the same species. We talked about that yesterday. What's the name of the species? Man. Good job. What are the names of the two variants? Male and female. I feel like I'm making progress. So every brain is different anyway. And we are still, male and female, more alike than we are different, although some people would like to argue that with me if I argued. Nevertheless, there are some key differences. We're going to talk about 4 of them this morning. We're going to talk about P and M cells in the retina, color perception, vision style, and then hearing and listening style and acuity, and they're really quite different. So as a review, you will see on the screen the cutaway of the brain, and then below that you will see the drawing that represents that gray matter cortex. That's the rind on the elephant, rind on the watermelon. Wonder how I started thinking about elephants. It's just amazing what thoughts pop into your brain. We don't always have control about that. What you do have control about is whether I keep thinking about an elephant or get focused back here on what I'm supposed to be talking about. So in the 2 posterior chunks of the brain, you have a total of 6 lobes. 2 visual on the bottom, 2 temporal on the side, and 2 parietal in the middle. And those are the decoding centers for all sensory data that comes into your brain, which all comes in through your brain stem and then gets routed to the correct decoding center, hopefully. So that what you take in through your eyes gets decoded in the occipital lobes. What you take in through sound gets decoded in the temporal lobes. And what you take in through taste and touch and muscle position and temperature gets decoded in the parietal lobes. If that triage process in the brainstem, which is orchestrated by a little organ called the thalamus, if that messes up, and the sensory data gets sent to the wrong decoding center, then you're probably going to have a hallucination, because the decoding center is not set up for that type of sensory data. The brain can take in and decode 10 million bits of sensory data per second. You cannot be aware of that consciously. But it is continually taking in data, monitoring it, decoding it, and if it thinks it's really important, it will get your attention. For example, you're walking across the campus, and suddenly you go like this, and you don't know the reason for that. And what happened often is that a bird flew between you and the sun. And the brain is going, ooh, there's something between you and the sun, you better pay attention. So it tries to help us be aware of what's going on when it thinks we need to know that. Odors are not decoded in this part of the brain. Odors are decoded in that middle mammalian part of the brain, which is lightning fast, 80,000 times faster than anything that happens in the third layer. So if you want to teach this to your children, think of your wrist as the first layer, your fist as the second layer. Now you put your other hand over the top of that second layer, and that's the third layer, the neocortex. And if you could just move this right into your brain, you would have those 3 layers, except they're all bunched together instead of being pulled apart. In large sample studies, there are estimates of sensory preference. What does that mean? It means that if you're unimpaired sensorily, I told you yesterday every brain is impaired, but relatively speaking, if you're unimpaired, you can take in sensory data in all the systems, through your eyes, through your ears, through your nose, through your mouth, through touch, and so on. But one of those will usually register most quickly and intensely in your brain, and that's what we call sensory preference. Now, some people know what their sensory preference is. Some people do not have a clue. You can go to my website and you can click on assessments, and you'll find a sensory preference assessment there. You can print it off, take it free of charge, give it to people that you live with, that you like to spend time with, and see how close you are in terms of sensory preference, because if you have the same sensory preference, it's speaking the same native language. If you have different sensory preferences, well, then you're going to have to do some translating. Earlier in my career, when we got some of this sensory information, I was very enthusiastic about it, and I was back in the state of New York. I don't know, there must have been 1,000 people present, and I was teaching them about sensory preference and the estimates, and I was really excited. And so I went through this, that 60% of the population come out as visual, and when you cut that by gender, more males are visual than females. 20% are auditory. When you cut that by gender, more females are auditory. And then the last 20% represents kinesthetics, and there doesn't seem to be any gender difference. And I was just ready to move to the next slide, and a woman sitting in the front elbowed her husband, practically knocked him off his chair, and she said in this loud whisper, "Well, Harry, I finally get it." I would never do this now. But back then I thought, oh, she's had an aha. I wonder if somebody else would have a similar aha. Let's ask her if she wants to share it. You know, you live and learn. So I said to her, obviously something's clicked in your brain. Would you like to come up and share that with us? She jumps up, runs up on the platform, grabs my microphone. So we know she's extroverted. And this is what she says. Harry and me have been married for 37 years. Today is the first time I ever got it. The first time I understand the reason that our whole married life, he always wants to do it with lights on and mirrors on the ceiling. As I said, I would not do that again. However, I'm glad she got an aha, because apparently it must have been a bone of contention between them, or at least he couldn't explain anything to her in a way that she got. All right, let's talk about the retina. P cells, P for perception. When you look at the retina of the female brain, there are far more P cells in the retina, which means that brain is more designed to process colors, hues, tints, and textures. And that type of brain is most sensitive to red, orange, green, and beige. Male brain is very different. They have some P cells. A pitiful little collection, actually. But they do have some P cells. And there are some men who have more P cells than others. But men in general don't process color and texture and tint and hues like the female brain. And the females get frustrated with that, and the males have no idea what color they're even looking at, because their brains are more sensitive to black, gray, silver, and blue. So some of you men may have noticed, you may not have, so I'm going to tell you, but you may have noticed that I usually am in some variation of navy blue or blues, because I would really like you to know that there really is somebody up here talking to you. Therefore, I need to be very careful about what colors I have on. So I was at a model home show not too long ago. I love to look at model homes. And I was walking through, and I came to this room, and there was one whole wall that was a real interesting shade of blue. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Wonder if I'd like that in my house. And in come this man and this woman. And he goes, "Marjorie, the wall is blue." And I thought, good for him, his P cells are working. Marjorie says, "That's not blue, it's turquoise." Okay, he feels shamed because he didn't get turquoise, and she thinks that he's dumb. That's so unhelpful. You know, if he gets blue, be delighted. Just be delighted. And the other thing is, stop asking him if you look good in a certain color. Women will say to their husbands, "Take a look at this. Do I look good in this color?" Okay, it may look gray to him. And he may say, "Well, I guess so." Well, she says, "Don't you know one or the other?" "Well, I think it looks okay." Or he'll say, "I don't like that color." Well, because it looks dishwater green to him. Stop asking him. If you think you look good in it, wear it. If you want some confirmation, ask a female brain that's got more P cells. Because, you know, he might say, "I don't know." Okay, then she's ticked for the rest of the day because she didn't get a lot of affirmation. Well, whose problem is it? She has somebody who doesn't have the cells to pull it off. So if you understand a little bit more about the brain, you prevent your own problems. And if you do forget and ask him, he says, "Yeah, you look great." Take it for face value. He's probably not looking at the color. And by the way, when you look at high-end cars in the United States, what colors do you find them in? Usually, the most expensive cars in the States are black, gray, silver, blue. Sometimes you'll find a red Corvette. Sometimes you'll find a yellow Corvette, but They're usually in colors that register really quickly in the male brain. Now we come to M cells, M for motion. And here we find the reverse. The male brain is loaded with M cells. In fact, women who have been pregnant with a boy and then a girl, or even twins, usually tell you that the male fetus was much more active than the female fetus. You know, just kick the living daylights out of them. And once they come out the chute, the male is still more motionful. And we do males, little boys, a huge disservice to tell them to sit down, shut up, and be quiet. Don't move, be still. That's not what they're designed to do. So if you take children with you to programs, take something for them to play with that's quiet, and they will listen better if they're playing with something, like a little squeezy toy or little cars or something that are not noisy. Because I knew this, I was lecturing to 250 psychiatrists one year for preps for their boards, and I had bought a couple of cases of little squeezy brains because I knew that some of them would need to be moving to listen, and they might not want to stand up, so they could just sit there and squeeze their brains. I unfortunately announced it like this. Gentlemen, it's my pleasure to be here today. I have brought each of you a brain. I'd say a significant number of them were not amused. But I passed out the brains and explained it to them. And it was interesting because several of them came up afterward and said, you know, I'm usually so bored in these kind of presentations. But he said, every time my mind might start to wander or I got sleepy, I just squeezed my brain. He said, I stayed awake the whole time. So think about that. You might want to invest in some of those for the males in your family. So the male brain is wired to be more physically active. The female brain, some females are quite physically active, but many of them don't approach the activity level of the typical male. They're more wired to look at faces and watch the expressions and pick up the nonverbal body language. We're a combination of nature and nurture, you know that, as human beings. Nature are genes and chromosomes, and nurture is the epigenetics, the cellular memory, what happens to us in the environment. So by the age of 12 months, it's really difficult to tell when you look at a behavior whether it's more driven by nature or nurture. So they try to do studies with human beings, some of them very early in life. So they were doing studies with 3-day-old infants, looking at things such as motion and looking at faces. And so imagine there's 50 bassinets lined up across the front. 25 baby girls, 3 days old, 25 baby boys, 3 days old. They have a graduate student at each bassinet. And the first thing they do is hold a picture of a real face over the bassinet so the baby can see it. And then they watch what these babies do. And little girls look at the face and look at the face and watch the face. And some of them will focus on the face as long as you hold it up there. Little boys look at the face. It's not moving. And they look away. And they may never look back at that face again. So here's the takeaway for your females. Stop asking your little boys to look at you. They looked at you once. They know what you look like. And that follows into adulthood. You know, when two men are talking together, you know, one's looking this way, jingling stuff in his pocket. The other one's looking this way, jingling stuff. And they might glance at each other periodically. They don't look at each other. Two women who are talking to each other are looking at each other directly, and they may stay looking at each other the whole time they're talking. There's one male exception, real research. They will tend to look at a female in a bright red dress who has an extremely curvy shape. It doesn't even follow for other colors, so go figure. I mean, that's really an exception because the male brain ordinarily doesn't really register red. So now they have these 50 babies, and they hold above each bassinet a mobile. You know, one of those things you put over the crib and it moves. And the little girls look at the mobile. Ah, that's interesting. I don't see a face, and they look away. And they may look back periodically, but they do not focus on the mobile. The little boys look at the mobile. Hallelujah, something's moving. And as long as you keep that mobile moving, that little male brain will usually stay focused on it. It's just very, very different. Let's talk about vision style differences, because here's where we have a lot of confusion. I told you yesterday that it takes about 1.6 years longer for the male brain to develop compared to the comparable female brain. And that's because more has to happen to that male brain. It gets some chemical baths that the female brain doesn't get to change it from the default position into a systemizing brain. And one of the things that happens is that male brain, in essence, gets a set of binoculars behind its eyes, which means that it really sees farther than the typical female brain. When I was in graduate school, they were teaching us about the hunter-gatherer societies, and they had this big convoluted reason that there were hunters and gatherers, and the men were the hunters and the women were the gatherers. It was a bunch of bunk. I mean, it's pretty simple. The men can see farther. So if you're going out hunting with a spear, a bow and arrow, you want to be able to see that quarry as soon as you can, so you don't scare it away before you can get close enough to kill it for dinner. Well, the average female is going to blunder right into the side of the thing before they've seen it, and it'll take off, and then you have no dinner. However, the female is much better at looking down at the ground and picking up seeds and plants and things that you can eat. You know, if a male had to do that, he would starve to death in the first week. Wrong distance. So the male brain is good at seeing things farther away. The female, and it's like a tunnel vision. Now, this doesn't mean that they can't do peripheral vision, but they usually don't. They're doing very tunnel vision. And if they want to look at something, they turn their whole head. Women get used to just moving their eyes, and they can see everything. Women have a short range, but a usable, wide peripheral vision. And you could go home, women, and figure this out. You just stand and look absolutely straight ahead, put your arms out, and see how far you can see them moving when you're looking straight ahead. And some women have more than 180 degrees range of vision. And often you'll hear kids say, you know, I can sometimes get away with something with my dad, but man, my mom's got eyes in the back of her head. No, she doesn't. She just has a different style and picks up a lot more in terms of periphery. So when I was a school nurse, started out early in my career as a school nurse, I decided I was not extroverted enough to do that. You know, a couple of years and my tongue was hanging out. But it was really interesting to watch these little kids. I had kids all the way from kindergarten through high school. And it was back in the era when we still had chalk and chalkboards. So you know that was the late 1800s. And the teacher would say, I need a new box of chalk. And every boy in the classroom is on his feet, holding his hands up. He is dying for an excuse to move. And she'll pick one and she'll say, all right, Johnny, go get me some chalk. So he'll walk over and he'll open the cupboard and he'll look. And look. And about then, some officious little girl hops up and runs over and says, it's right here, you moron. What are you, blind? So we know that that child was taught pejoratives at home because there's nothing wrong with his brain. It's just this is not the right distance for him to see anything. And that follows through at home as well. Had a lady come to my office. People show up in my office for the most amazing reasons. This lady comes in, she plunks her purse down and she says, I'm so sick and tired of my husband asking me to find things for him. And I said, really? Now give me an example. Oh, well, she says this morning, that's how come I'm here. When I hear, hun, I know he's lost something again. I hear, hun. I said, yes. He said, have you seen my glasses? She said, well, are they on your head? No, he said, they're not. Well, she said, I don't know where they are. He says, well, where did you see them last? She said, I think I saw them on your desk. Pause. Where on my desk? Right in the middle. Pause. Can you come and help me find them? So she says, I go in and he's standing in front of his desk looking at it and the glasses are right there. And I said, here they are. I think we should tie them to your head, which is not very affirming. She said, I'm sick and tired of it. He says, I think I'd do better living by myself. And I said, well, that might be an unfortunate reason to do so. Does he have a lot of money? Because if he does, that might work. But if he doesn't and you love him, you might want to stay there. Well, she said, how do I deal with this? I said, well, I want to ask you to do something for me. I didn't tell her about binoculars and the male brain yet. I just said, do you have binoculars at home? Yeah, she said, we do. I said, good. I want you to go home. I want you to take his glasses. I want you to set them in the middle of his desk. I want you to take a pair of binoculars, put them up to your eyes, and find those glasses and call me as soon as you do. Okay, she called me the next day. She said, that was awful. I said, well, did you find them? Well, she said, yes and no. And I said, well, which is it? And she said, well, I found them looking at them, but then I had to put the binoculars up to my eyes and look at the glasses and then move the binoculars. And I finally found them. Took me forever. I said, okay, so how come you're whining about him? You know what whining is? Whining is anger because we expected something different from what we got, and we've got this little sound squeezing out through a very small opening. So then I explained to her about the difference in what's easy for a male to see and what's easier for a female to see. And she goes, oh, I didn't know that. I said, well, why don't you go home and apologize, fix him a really good dinner, and next time he asks you to help him, because we can help each other in different ways. We will not be able to help each other in the same way. So this is what we often see in many homes. Do you see any butter? And that's unfortunate because I think that's pretty stressful for a male. Now, in our house, if we could open the refrigerator door and it would stay open, we'd be good to go. But it closes automatically to save, electricity. But if you could open the door and he could back up 10 or 12 feet, He could probably find anything he wanted in the refrigerator, but this is not a good distance for him. I didn't know this when my boys were younger. Very unfortunate. I quickly learned, because I have an auditory sensory preference, that I wanted their friends to come to our house where I could sort of keep an ear on them. I didn't have to be in the room looking at them, but I only had to listen for 2 types of sounds: absolute silence or chaos. And I would investigate. They went through a stage where they loved a certain type of lemonade. Came in a little tin, shallow container, and you pulled the paper off the top and dumped it into a couple of quarts of water, and you had lemonade. So they'd each have at least one friend over, so there's half a dozen right there. And I would make 3 2-quart pitchers of lemonade, put it in the fridge so there'd be plenty Saturday night. And this is how it went. Mom, we're thirsty. Great. Made you lots of lemonade. It's in the fridge. Help yourself. Pause. Where in the fridge? On the top shelf. Pause. Where on the top shelf? Right in front of you. Pause. Could you help us find it? And to my regret, I would sometimes hear a little edge come into my voice, and I'd walk into the fridge, and here's 2 of them with their heads nearly inside the thing, and they can't find the lemonade. And I'd say, look, it's right here. Do you see these 3 bright red pitchers? What was I doing? I was doing something that worked for the female brain, but not for the male brain. They would have seen it much more likely if they'd been black or blue, not red. So I had to apologize for that. I'll apologize for anything that I didn't know about and would have done differently had I known. So we had to eventually come up with a solution in our home as we began to get this information. So you got a couple solutions, a couple options. You can buy a second fridge. And you can put it out in the garage where there's lots of room, and you can fix it so when you open the door, you can, connect it to a post with a bungee cord, and then they can back up and they can see everything. We didn't have room in our garage. So I told them the 3 of them could have their own shelf. And I promised that if you put something in the fridge on that shelf, I won't touch it, because here's what men say happens. It's Super Bowl Sunday, and they're watching the game on television, and they take a can of 7-Up or Red Bull or whatever it is they're drinking, and they put it carefully in the fridge so they know exactly where it will be at halftime. They don't even have to look. They just open the door, reach in, and pull it out. And at halftime, they open the door, reach in, and pull out, not what they put in there, but the can, a jar of ketchup or something like that. Because some officious female has moved it because it didn't belong there. So I gave them their own shelf, and I said, there's only 2 times when I will check that shelf. If I open the door and something's moving on that shelf, I'm going to check it. Or if I open the door and there's this big, giant ball of green fuzz, I'll be checking that too. Otherwise, that's your shelf. And we did a whole lot better. So who lives longer, males or females? Females. Well, now you ought to know the reason. It must be very, very stressful for men to not be able to find anything, because the house is set up for the female brain, which is fascinating to me, because many people who draw plans are men, but they must be drawing them because they know what works for a woman. It doesn't work for them. So pay attention, because I think men might live longer if they weren't so stressed. Let's talk about hearing acuity. So when the female child is born, in general, she has much, much better hearing. It's much more acute. And she has a lower incidence of word deafness. You know, men often have more word deafness. That means if they hear a word that sounds very much the same, but maybe just a letter or two different, like call, haul, ball, wall, doll, they don't have a clue what you just said because it sort of runs together in their brain. And this was always happening to my mom and dad. She'd say something and he'd go, "Did you say wall?" "No, Warren, I didn't. I said doll." "Doll?" You know, and she'd get really frustrated because we didn't have this research yet. So not only does the female brain have more acute hearing, but it's more distracted by sounds in the environment. And we've learned this through something as simple as giving IQ tests. So you take a group of women and put them in a room, equal number of men, and you give them an IQ test and you keep the room purposefully absolutely quiet. And the females will score higher on the IQ test than the males. Now you have the same group of people later on, and you put them in a room where there's a lot of distraction. Maybe there's music playing, you know, they're re-roofing the tent, I don't know what they're doing. And the males get higher scores because distraction in the environment actually helps them focus in and listen better, which is not true for girls, which is the reason I'm leaning toward, if I had anything to say about it, an educational system where, you know, up till maybe high school or later, all the girls are in one room and all the boys are in another room, because in the girls' room you could keep things kind of quiet and they do better. In the boys' room you could have lots going on, getting around, up and down, walking around, music playing, whatever, and they would do better. So here was another apology to my kids. They wanted to listen to their, well, they weren't iPods back then, but they wanted to listen to music with their headphones while they did homework. And what do you think I said? "No, you can't do that." "Well, Mom, we could do homework better if we listened to music." And I said, "Get a grip." Because I couldn't do better listening to music. I needed quiet. And then we got this research. So I had, that's wonderful for an auditory, by the way. So something must have flown overhead because it cannot be the guys in the back. They have done a stellar job. You know, sometimes this happens all the time. Where was I? That completely discombobulated my brain. Oh, yes. So we got this research, and they said, you know, "Can I listen to music?" And I said, "No." So I called them in, and I said, "You know, guys, I have to apologize. All this time I have been putting what works for the female brain onto your brain, and I wasn't letting you listen to music while you were doing homework, and I apologize. And as long as you get your homework done, you're welcome to listen to music while you do it." Oh, great. So they start listening to music while they do their homework, and what do you suppose happened? They got it done and their grades went up. And so a little ways down the line it was, "Mom, can we watch TV while we do our homework? I'm sure we could do better." And I go, We got research about that one. Because more males are visual, and they'll get looking at the visualness and they'll forget to do their work. But you can keep listening to music. As early as age 11, and that's the first research I could find that showed that the female brain is distracted by noise levels 10 times softer than anything that gets a male's attention or that a boy would find distracting. I mean, that's pretty amazing. So males start out with less acute hearing, and gentlemen, I hate to tell you, it just goes downhill from there. So you want to protect your ears. You really do. If you're listening to anything that's relatively loud, pop in earplugs. Unless, of course, you're happy to know that eventually you won't be able to hear anything your wife says. Now, here's the other thing that often happens with males and females. They're at breakfast together, and she is chattering away a mile a minute, because women speak many more words per minute than males usually do. He's reading the paper. And she says, "Are you listening to me?" And he goes, "Uh-huh." Actually, her chattering is helping him focus on the paper a whole lot better. And everything is going fine if she just shut up with that question. But so often she doesn't get it. And her next question is, "Okay, what did I just say?" And depending on how far back in their marriage he says what he thought she just said will be the degree to which there is chaos in the home. So women, just stop asking those questions. We'll talk about how you get his attention. So the practical application for this part is if you're female in general, and you really need to study, you want to be in an environment where everything is quiet and free of distraction. Now, this is bell curve research, so there are some females who actually do better with music playing in the background, but that is a very small proportion. And some women learn better if they're doing something with their hands, which again is more like the male brain, except bell curve. Some women do better with taking notes, or I tell women if I'm speaking to an all-female group, or any group where there's women, if you want to bring knitting, crocheting, whatever, do it. I won't even see you, and it's probably going to help you listen. So if you understand how different brains work, that's great. And males, as I said, need to do something with their hands. That was another mistake I made, speaking to a group of people, and I didn't say I brought them a brain. I said, "I have brought you something to squeeze while you're listening." Because there's only so much a man can do with his hands in public. So I think he knew I was going to say that, and he just cut me off. So laugh about it, but work with it. So is the issue that I'm getting too close to the edge of the stage today? Hello? All right, that's fine. I'll just do my best. Listening differences. This is what we'll finish up with, because we just talked about the breakfast scenario. Now here's that drawing again of the brain showing the two temporal lobes. Listen up. The left temporal lobe is primarily involved in decoding speech sounds. About an 85% advantage for decoding speech sounds. 15% advantage for non-speech sounds. The temporal lobe on the right side is exactly flipped. 85% advantage for decoding non-speech sounds and a 15% advantage for decoding speech sounds. So that if you lost a whole side of your temporal lobe, you could still do both out of the other side, although one would be easier than the other. So we didn't know till we had PET scan studies that even though the brains are configured this way in both male and female brains, they don't operate the same way. So you put a female brain in a PET scan camera and ask her to listen to human voices. Males, females, old, young, babies, crying, doesn't matter. When you look at that PET scan, what you see is both temporal lobes have lit up and they're decoding speech sounds and non-speech sounds. You put a male brain in a PET scan camera and ask him to listen to a male voice, and the left temporal lobe lights up and the right side's completely dark. Now remember, the male brain is more lateralized. It can go into one and focus there and just idle the other side. So frankly, it takes less energy to run a male brain. That doesn't happen in the female brain. If any part of it is on, it's all on. So now you ask a male to listen to a female voice and you get the flip. The left side with the primary advantage in decoding speech sounds is dark as pitch. The right side has lit up, but it's only got about a 15% advantage for decoding speech. So if he likes the sound of his wife's voice, and she says, "Are you listening?" He goes, "Yep." He is, just like a melody line of music in the background. The problem comes when she says, "What did I just say?" Because there's not a lot of advantage for decoding speech sounds there. So this can cause some problems. Here's another 3-day-old baby experiment. They take 43-day-old babies and they put them in a room and get them all crying. I don't want to know how they did that, but they get them all crying. And then they blindfold one of the mothers, say to her, "We're going to put you in this room and we want you to find your child as fast as you can by the sound of its cry." And she's got it in under a minute. You put the father in the room and you ask him to find his child by the sound of its cry. The kid's 40 and he still hasn't located him. Just doesn't happen. So when somebody says, "Of course I'm listening, your voice is music to my ears," take that literally. But they might not have any idea what you just said or are saying. So how can you compensate for that? Well, know, first of all, that the female brain is using both sides no matter what she's listening to. And she will pick up the words and the nuances and the tonalities and the prosody. You know, prosody is that inflection that's often a little sarcastic. And the words may say one thing, but the sound says another. So I'll take a risk with Rena. This is prosody. "Well, Rena, those are really lovely shoes." Okay, what's the message? They're terrible. What were the actual words? Lovely shoes. Okay, boys are going to miss that. So sometimes they'll say something, somebody will say something like that and they'll go, "Oh, thank you," which was not exactly intended. So in the States, we have been working with individuals who have committed date rape and women who have been date raped. And we think that something is going on like that in those instances. Now, read my lips. There's not a man on this planet who cannot stop his behavior at any point at which he chooses to do so. So there's never an excuse for date rape. What I would like to point out is that we have not taught our young people about these differences. So here's some generalizations. Many young men will say, "Well, honestly, I didn't mean to rape her. I mean, we were just making out, and, she's making these funny little noises, and I thought that just meant understand that I'm a good girl, but, if you keep pushing, I'll give you what you want." Unfortunately, the research shows that when a female gets uncomfortable in a dating situation, what's the first thing she starts to do if she doesn't understand this information? Giggle. So he's getting really amorous and she's going, "I don't want to do this. Don't do that." Okay, well, he has trouble even with that register level of a voice tone, and it's unclear. So the two things we need to teach our young people: one, you need to say one word and give the guy the bottom line. You need to use a gesture, because remember, more M cells. So if a girl is getting uncomfortable about the level of amorous activity, the response is, stop. There isn't a man on the planet that's not going to get that. But we haven't taught each other how to do that, and we need to talk about that. So if you're female, and you really want a male to actually not only listen but decode your words, there's some strategies that you need to consider, and here they are. Number one, lower your voice pitch. Speak up. If you're talking to males in the audience, always have a microphone. Teachers in school need a microphone. The boys usually sit in the back. They don't hear as well. They miss tons of stuff. You know, the teacher said, well, let me see if I can get out of my speaking voice. If you came to my house, my voice is much softer. It's a higher pitch. The inflections go up at the end of the sentence because female language is my native language. And I sound like I'm asking a question even when I'm not. And I sound like I might not know what I'm talking about even if I do. So when you go to public speaking courses, the first thing they tell you is find your common lowest voice tone and try to stick to it. Speak up, get a microphone. The more you sound like a male voice, the better chance you have that some of the men in the audience are going to get something you said. Get those inflections down at the end of the sentence, because males have a problem-solving fix-it brain. And if they don't even get the words but they hear, it sounds like you're uncertain or not sure of what to do. They'll start pumping adrenaline and go into problem solving and tell you what to do, and that is the furthest thing from what you want at the moment. And whatever you do, give them the bottom line first. Because it takes more energy for the male brain to decode a female voice, even when you're doing your best to follow these guidelines. By the time you get to the bottom line, if you're doing typical female speech, meaning you started out when Hector was a pup and told the whole story, by the time you get to the bottom line, he's no longer tuned in because he's out of energy. So you got to give him the bottom line first. I know that's anathema to the female brain, but practice. So I was talking about this, and a lady came to me and said, I didn't think that you knew what you were talking about. So I went home and I thought, I'll give it a whirl. So she said, we were at breakfast and Harry's doing as usual, you know, drinking coffee, reading the paper. When I talk to him every once in a while, he'll go, And I took a deep breath and I lowered my voice and I said, Harry, I just bought round the world tickets on the QE2. We leave next Monday. She said, the man heard me. He dropped his paper, spilled his coffee, knocked his chair over, and said, what did you just say? You know, men will ask questions if they really want more information. So women need good women friends. Go tell them your story and pare it down to the bottom line and give that to your partner. They will love you forever. They'll have more energy than you could imagine. Of course, now you know how to burn up their energy. So if you are male and you want to decode, not everybody does, then you need to do some strategies as well. The minute she opens her mouth and starts talking, first thing you say is, please speak up, but avoid shouting when you say that, because remember, the female brain responds to sounds 1/10 of the decibel level that you think is loud. You know, that happens to fathers and their little girls. You know, he comes in and will say, all right, Sally, clean up your stuff because we got to go to dinner. And she bursts out crying and says, what did I do wrong? Because the voice is so loud. So you need to pay attention to that. Then you ask her to give you the bottom line. If she starts with, you know, the year Hector was born, you go, stop, give me the bottom line. You are still going to need to pay attention because it's going to take you more energy to decode her voice. And then I suggest at the end you repeat what you think you heard her say because it may not even be on the same planet. And if you will just be aware of how males and females function and realize that it comes from their native language, you'll just do a whole lot better. One of my favorite examples as we close is one day the phone rang in our house and my husband picked up the phone. And I'm sitting there, and this consisted of his entire conversation. Uh-huh. Yeah. Good. Sure. Bye. I'm sitting there, and I go, who was that? Oh, that's your favorite Aunt Isabel. Oh, what did she say? Everything's fine. Okay, that's the bottom line. Everything's fine, but I want to know what of the everythings are fine. So I get on the phone and I go, Aunt Isabel, my husband says everything's fine. Tell me what's fine. Okay, 30 minutes later, I've got it all. You know, my cousin is pregnant, finally. The cat just had 3 kittens. She's going to Tibet on a cruise and on, but everything's fine. It's just different. It's not good or bad, right or wrong. So ask yourself how much of your life you have spent getting upset because of these gender differences, and you only know your own brain, and you think there's something wrong with his or hers. Now, there may be, but not in this arena, because we're so different. So if you will start speaking to the other gender the way their brain gets it most quickly, and have fun in the process, you'll probably be healthier, happier. You might even live longer. Thank you.